The S scale is what we call the pace scale. And when we talk about pace, we're talking about how quickly or slowly someone is doing something. Now, just once again to share a little bit about myself, I'm a fairly low I, not off the scale low, but I score around about 40 on my I scale. But I'm also a fairly high S, and so I have an element of relationship orientation to me, and I'm not overly fast-paced, but I mentioned before that I have a fair bit of D in my profile, and that's part of the impatience part of my profile, and that need to actually get things done, and I see practice as an opportunity to improve and achieve outcomes and goals. It is possible, and the reason I'm giving you my example of a profile is because my profile is one which I would call a diametrically opposed profile. So it is possible to have coaches and athletes and people that are DSs, and it is possible to have people that are ICs or CIs. So it is possible to be diametrically opposed. And what it basically means is that at one time or another you'll behave a little bit more like a D, or there'll be other times when you behave very much so like an S, just the same as that CI profile. With DISC, we get any number of different combinations, and what's interesting for coaches is that when we profile a team, we work very hard to give the coaches a great understanding of how that player's profile is going to help them contribute to the team, and importantly, what might be some strategies on how to coach that athlete most effectively. But as you notice here, the S scale, as I said, it's about pace of behaviour. Now that's not how quickly or slowly you talk, or how quickly or slowly you think, but it is about how quickly or slowly you do things, such as talking, walking, moving about. You may notice that there are always players on your team that are a little bit slower to get to training or to complete an activity than some of the other faster paced members. So if you're a high S, you're a little bit slower paced. If you're a low S, you're much faster paced. Now, pace is one of the most common conflicts people have, not just team members, but people in general. I was at a training course just yesterday, and we were doing just an activity with a completely new group of people, and it was a similar topic to what we're talking about here. And two people who had never worked together before, after we spoke about the DISC model, they noticed that they had a pace conflict. They were cutting up some paper in a certain way to make a paper ring. It was a little experiential exercise to see how they function as a team, and one of the participants was really keen to just keep cutting and to get the job done as quickly as possible, because there was a timeline, there was a time expectation that they'd have it done in 10 minutes, and they had just a few minutes to go. They were going to get there, and a patient approach and a very methodical approach was going to get an outcome. Yet pace is something which is inherent to our behavioural style, and it's not an easy thing to adapt. My coach, who I worked with for 3 Olympics, with rowing, even the speed at which an athlete would put their oar into the water was an outcome of their style of behavioural in terms of DISC. And athletes that were slower paced, we found that it was easier for someone to slow down than it was for someone to speed up. Okay, and so I'm sure that some of you would have seen this pace conflict in action. And once again, it's just an awareness of the fact that people are different pace, and the critical thing about understanding that is that we don't associate laziness or perhaps not wanting to be there or not being enthusiastic with slower paced behaviour. It's just not the case, and so we can assume that everyone is keen to be involved and to be there on the team, but they're going to have different ways of expressing that behaviour. And so it's just pace, that's all it is. Once again, the last one here is the conscientious style. And when we're talking about the conscientious style, what we're talking about is the degree to which someone is more or less likely to follow rules, systems, processes, and procedures. And so what we're suggesting is that someone who is a high C, they've got a great ability to see a rule as a rule. And one of the first questions that I ask when we're doing this exercise in groups is to ask the team, so of the members that are high Cs, how do you interpret a rule? And of all of the times that I've done it, the answer is very much the same each time. If they are truly a high C, they'll see a rule as being something that you must follow. And when I ask the same question to the low Cs, they'll see rules as mainly being guidelines, or perhaps just an outline of perhaps how you should behave or what you should do. but they do see a lot of grey area. Now, once again, it's not whether it's right or wrong or anything else. It's literally just how you interpret things. And once again, though, you can see how someone who sees a rule as being a rule and that must be followed can easily potentially conflict with someone who sees a rule as being perhaps something that mainly is there for other people, really, but certainly has a lot of grey area. And so some of the other behaviours that you can see with the high Cs is that they have this great degree of accuracy and precision to all of the things that they do. They can be a little bit more conservative. They're often a little bit more slower paced, but they're methodical. The value that they add to a team is that they absolutely ensure that things are done the right way. Now, when we're talking about that grip process before, ensuring that our goals are aligned, ensuring that our values and behaviours are well taken care of in terms of being defined, the high Cs are often the ones who role model those behaviours in an exceptional way, and so they set a really great example for the other players on the team in terms of what you do want them to do. Typically, Cs, ones with athletes with high Cs, are not the style of athlete that you're going to get a lot of management type problems from. They literally will stick to the guidelines that you've established. Okay. What else they're good at? They're very good at perfecting their technique. They're very good at being methodical about how they go about their work. They're very organised. They don't forget their training gear. Not to say that the low Cs do, but the reality is a lot of the lower Cs do forget their stuff. But having said that, the low Cs are more flexible and fluid with their thinking, and how that works in terms of let's imagine that you've got a strategy and a structure that you want to follow. The low Cs are less structured than the high Cs, and so therefore can be a little bit more fluid and often play what they see in a football game or a soccer match. We often find that the low Cs are the ones that can play a less structured style of game, and the high Cs play a more structured style of game. And we even see that we do a lot of work in golf, and we even see the same pattern of behaviour play out on the golf course, where the high Cs are very good at analysing all of the details of the course, making sure that they've got a great awareness of the slope of the green, and the list goes on. Now, the thing about the Cs and the S's, particularly if I go back to the S's and group them with the Cs, is that they're fairly conflict averse. So because they are a little more introverted than obviously the I's and the D's, if you do have conflict in your team, they're not likely to be the ones to openly vocalize that conflict in front of the entire group. And so they very much keep it to themselves. Now, the interesting thing about that is that you may think that they might be simply going along with everything that's being said, but the reality is that they will be potentially in conflict with some of their team members. It's just that they're not vocalizing it. So how do we actually notice if there is a conflict between our less extroverted members of the group? Well, that's where we as coaches need to become very good at understanding what their behavioural style is. And so you know for a fact that if you've got C's and S's on your team in particular, they will be keeping things a little bit closer to their chest and not playing all of their cards and perhaps showing all of their emotions in a more extroverted way like the D's and the I's can. And so you're tuned in to noticing this. And that's a really important thing, because you'll start to notice the different body language gestures and signals that your different players give off. And we call that the process of calibrating someone. And by the same way that you may notice that when you go home and you see your respective partner or your child or whoever it may be, and without even asking them a question, you can tell if they've had a great day or not. You can tell if they're a little bit frustrated or if they're in a different type of mood. You can tell that because you've basically calibrated them. You know what they look like when they're really enthusiastic and engaged and really happy to be there, and you know, there's a good level of harmony in the group. By the same token, when there's not, you should be able to see some differences. And of course, to address that, you would address it with more one-on-one conversations rather than addressing it in front of the entire group. Okay. Now, I wanted to look at these disc behavioural conflicts and to just give you a quick overview of this. essentially with the C's and the D's, each one of these arrows. Now, if you want more information on this, once again, this is available for free on our website. We're happy to send you these details. You'll find out all of the information you need to find out. But we have these things which we call coaching cards, and we give the coaches that we work with one of these coaching cards, and on the back of the coaching card is this specific model. And it is literally looking at every one of these arrows represents a potential conflict between team members. And so if you look at the D's and the I's, their potential conflict is over what we call their priority. D's being more task focused, I's being more relationship and people oriented. The same conflict happens between the C's and S's, it's just that it's going to be more covert than overt. Once again, here between the C's and the D's, whilst they're both task focused, there's a massive difference in pace. So D's want to get things done much quicker and are often less concerned about how things get done than things just getting done and achieving the result that they want to achieve. C's are more focused on getting that process exactly right. S's and I's, it's the same thing, it's another pace conflict. Now between the C's and I's and the D's and S's, so you'll see that in the middle there we have what we call the diametrically opposed profiles, and they have both a pace and priority conflict. And so understanding DISC, so I now know that if a group of people are together and they've been together for not a long period of time, but long enough to get to know each other a little bit, and if we're not seeing any conflict, then there's something wrong. Okay, and if you're not seeing conflict, it's going to largely be because people are not challenging each other. People are not demanding that the standards are being upheld. And so quite often you'll see, if you don't go through the process of establishing your values, behaviors, the whole GRIP process, what can happen is that the conflict becomes about things which are going to be largely unproductive. They're going to have clashes of personalities, you're going to have values clashes, you're going to have behavior which is really going to derail your team. Now, if you have established that GRIP process, if you've worked out your values, behaviors, your roles, all of those relationship issues, you've established some clear guidelines for how you want your team to conduct itself, I can guarantee that the conflict that you're going to have is going to be productive conflict. Why? Because it's going to be about setting standards, it's going to be about challenging each other, it's going to be within the framework that you've actually established. And that's the most important thing, is to realize that you will have conflict, but you want to have a type of conflict which is going to be more productive than unproductive. I've given you this slide because when we talk about the different cliques that people form, this slide can give you an idea as to how people get along. Now, people get along differently in different contexts, which is interesting about DISC, because when we think about the work that we're doing in terms of working with coaches such as yourselves, obviously the context that we're in is a performance-driven context. Now, this is compatibility within a performance-driven context. Now, most people can get along well when there's very little at stake. So for example, if you're just meeting someone socially, you're more willing to accept the difference in pace of behavior. If you're just meeting someone socially, you're more willing to accept someone who talks a lot, especially if you're just meeting them for a short amount of time, rather than spending a whole duration of a season with them. And so once again, this model is all about understanding how people are going to work together in the context of a performance environment. And as you can see, hopefully you've noticed something about the compatibility here, that you'll see that the most compatible is the same style, it's that S style. Now, there's a very good reason for that. Roughly 50% of any given population, it's roughly 52% of any given population are S. Now, there's a reason, because S's are conflict averse, they're relationship focused, they're team players, they want to create and establish loyalty to their fellow team members. That's a key priority for them. Now, if you've got a team of athletes and you don't have enough S's in that team, you're going to have a team that's going to be more individualistic. You're going to have a team which is naturally just a little more focused on their own individual goals and less selflessly oriented towards the team's goals. Now, one of the teams we're working with at the moment, obviously I don't talk about our clients in detail, but there are some interesting examples. One of the teams has a lot of S-style players in it, and they're very good. They're very good at being able to grind out a victory and establish a win through playing a very consistent and steady style of play. So it's a good illustration of how the dynamic of your team very much influences how your team actually plays. But the key thing with the S's is because they're the most compatible. One of the reasons they're most compatible is because they're quite adaptable to others, because as a priority they value harmony and they value the relationship. Now it doesn't mean that the others won't, but S's just do that naturally. Now the only limitation of the S's is that if there is conflict, it's like I said before, they're not going to be vocal in actually letting people know up until a point. S's are interesting because up until a point, when they get to that point where it literally becomes the straw that breaks the camel's back, and S's can be prone to perhaps some quite explosive behaviour when they hit that point. They do have a long fuse, but once it's gone off, people will know about that. Now you will notice what is the least compatible are the D's. And as we said before, two D's are going to argue and conflict over essentially who's going to do the leadership role and who's going to be the authority figure on the team. And you can see here also two I's can be quite uncompatible, mainly because there's always a battle for attention.